Alright, Wubby, I hope I have your attention. Now this isn't going to be a long tirade slandering and berating you for your opinions about cultural appropriation. I want this to be a learning experience. Firstly, I think the opinions that you express are pretty dangerous, and they're also wrong. And I think it's important that you see that you're wrong and why you're wrong, so that we can come to some kind of understanding. So for those of you who might be watching and not up to speed, PayMoneyWubby is a streamer and YouTuber who often makes these videos that seek out different weird or bizarre YouTube channels and poke fun at them. I occasionally disagree with some of the humor he uses. See Strucci Movie's video on political correctness because she articulates exactly how I feel about these issues, especially this clip here she pulls from comedian Stuart Lee.
Now, one hesitates in the current climate to make a joke on stage about the Muslims, right? Not for fear of religious reprisals, right? When's that ever hurt anyone? But because of a slightly more slippery anxiety, which is, like, basically, when you do, like, stand up in a small room, it's like, oh, we're all friends, right? And we can make a joke, but you don't really know how a joke's received, and it could be that it's laughed at enthusiastically in a way that you don't understand, particularly out there, and if you don't know who's watching on television, I mean, if it's on telly on Paramount, probably someone horrible, an idiot. So you don't know. The problem is 84% of people, apparently, of the public, think that political correctness has gone mad. Now, I don't know if it has. People still get killed, don't they, for being the wrong colour or the wrong sexuality or whatever. And what is political correctness? It's an often clumsy negotiation towards a kind of formally inclusive language, and there's all sorts of problems with it, but it's better than what we had before. But 84% of people think political correctness has gone mad, and you don't want one of those people coming up to you after the gig and going, well done, mate. Well done, actually, for having a go at the fucking Muslims. Well done, mate. You know, you can't do anything in this country anymore, mate. Is political correctness gone mad? You know, you can't even write racial abuse in excrement on someone's car without the politically correct brigade jumping down your throat. And you don't want those people coming up to you after gigs, because that's Al Murray, the pub landlord's audience. Missing the point and laughing through bared teeth like the dogs they are.
So the opinions that Wubby expresses in the latter half of this video are just kind of accumulation of reactionist opinions on race relations that I find particularly dangerous to people of color, and so, by extension, myself. He's reacting to a video, and this is a reaction to a reaction, so it's going to be a bit scattered, so I apologize. I encourage you to go watch his video first so you can be sure I'm not misrepresenting him, but I'm pretty much going to keep what he says intact. So he's reacting to this video by Julie called Do All White People Think the Same About Race? They bring 6 white Americans into a room and have them react on a spectrum to a few questions about race. So I actually have a problem with this from the get-go. The answer is no, this isn't really much of a question. I don't really understand why this is a question, or why they felt that this would be constructive in really any way, because we're not really asking any actual minoritized people how they feel about these issues and getting a more nuanced and constructive view on these issues. White people have some pretty skewed views on race and racism. In her 1995 article for the Berkeley Journal of Gender, Law, and Justice, Barbara J. Flagg describes something she calls the transparency phenomena. This is my label for the fact that white people tend to be unconscious of whiteness as a distinct racial characteristic, and so tend to equate whiteness with racelessness. Behaviors and characteristics associated with whites take on the same aura of race neutrality. Thus, white people frequently interpret norms adopted by a dominant white culture as racially neutral, failing to recognize the ways in which those norms may in fact be covertly race-specific. It's likely that you discussed race in connection with the nomination of Clarence Thomas. But how many of you had conversations about how race might have affected the character and personality of Justice Breyer? Or ponder whether his whiteness might have predisposed him to a racially skewed perspective on legal issues? So we all have skewed views on race and racism. I think it's pretty important to recognize that there is no one perfectly unbiased views on systemic oppression, race, and racism. It is a complex issue that has been muddied by trying to whitewash or simply hide these kind of issues. However, the title of this video and the people in this video actually make their race pretty salient in the conversation that they're having, which is good. However, we're still having a conversation about things that completely disproportionately affect people of color without actually talking to people of color. Hey, what's that? It's almost like we've been doing this for forever, and the consequences have been disastrous, violent, if not genocidal. It's not like white people can't have valid opinions on race and racism. There are plenty of very intelligent and capable race and racism scholars who are white. But we are having a conversation with a bunch of people who are probably largely uninformed about this kind of stuff. So the reality is we're really just asking how they feel about a lot of these questions. They're not necessarily basing their opinions on fact. They're probably just basing it off of their experience, which becomes pretty obvious, as well as what they see in the media. This isn't a particularly constructive way to have a conversation about systemic injustices that have real and studyable consequences on real people. I don't think that the kind of reactionary opinions that Wubby and some of the people here espouse are very constructive or valid, because they are the same arguments that have been used to help oppress people of color. Also, overall, the people in this video and their articulation of their points are pretty clumsy. So, yeah, it's going to be pretty easy to poke holes in their arguments, especially when you're not talking to a room full of race scholars. And again, to a certain extent, my view is based off of just my opinion and my experiences. However, I do disproportionately see a lot of the consequences of systemic injustices as well as experience them. My view is not the end-all be-all. Other people of color will rightfully disagree with me, but I think it's important I share my side of the story. People are completely in the right to correct me in the comments and share their side of the story as well. So, let's begin.
I believe in reverse racism. 3, 2, 1.
I don't know what that is.
We can explain it.
Reverse racism is like someone being racist against you because you are white.
Oh, that's totally real. How would that not be? What?
Like, do you believe that someone can be racist against a white person?
Yes.
I grew up with all Latino or black friends. I had very few white friends. And yeah, I got made fun of for being like the white girl. I was gringa. And I didn't take offense to it because the huge part about racism is that there's hate and oppression behind it. And as a white person in America, I do not feel oppressed.
That has, hold on. What did she just say?
The huge part about racism is that there's hate and oppression behind it.
She subtly just redefined racism to fit her argument. Here's what the actual definition of racism is: prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against someone of a different race based on the belief that their own race is superior. There is nothing in here about control, oppression, or power. White people were in power and have the power to oppress, so they are the only ones who can be racist. What? Where is that in the definition of racism? You stupid bitch! Are you implying that, like, Asian people can't be racist too? Motherfucker, have you been to prison? Are you kidding me? There are gangs divided by race who hate every other color. Are you kidding me?
There's hate and oppression behind it.
No. Not according to the definition. I feel like what I'm saying is like considered controversial, but I don't know why it is. I'm literally looking up the definition of racism and it's not what she's saying. I don't understand where she's getting this definition.
When I think of the word racism, I think more towards oppression, so that's why I'm in the disagree. Like, I'll deal with someone just being mean to me, but whatever.
But that's racism, dude.
Alright, point 1. Reverse racism. This is a semantics issue more than anything. People talk about racism in terms of power dynamics and that only the dominant group can be racist. Personally, I think that if it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, we should call it racism. So let's actually start with the historical context of reverse racism. Reverse racism as a term gained popularity in the 70s in response to affirmative action policies that favored people of color over white people. It was a way to scaremonger people into tearing down affirmative action on the basis that it would create a racist system, but just going the other way. To explain how that works, there's actually some really interesting psychology here. Most relevant to this conversation is the realistic conflict theory. The realistic conflict theory was an idea best demonstrated by the Robbers Cave experiment in 1954 by Muzaffar and Carolyn Wood Sharif. The study was about a group of boys from similar backgrounds who were made to compete with each other at a summer camp for limited resources. It demonstrated that hate and prejudice arose despite there being very little dividing the group of boys demographically. Because they were made to compete with each other, a destructive and violent in-group bias developed, and they fought, stole, and destroyed each other's property simply because they were competing for these limited resources. This can be applied broadly to how people in the dominant group view access to social services, jobs, and most importantly here, education. White people were afraid that people of color were going to steal all their seats in the classroom, and so they undid some very important legislation and policy that was designed to help lift people of color out of poverty and better the next generation after centuries of systemic injustices. So that's the root and reason behind a term like reverse racism. It stems from a place of trying to put people of color back into disadvantaged situations and retain power. So does reverse racism exist? Yes. And no. Of course it's possible for people of color to hate white people solely on the basis of their race. It's possible for any person of any one race or ethnicity category to hate another race or ethnicity solely because of that race or ethnicity. In fact, I think being prejudiced towards white people solely on the basis of their race is pretty destructive. I think that it needs to stop being encouraged by other people of color in safe spaces or places where those kind of conversations can happen. I think it's more understandable for a person of color to be racist towards a white person just because people of color have endured some pretty horrific and painful things at the hands of white people. However, I don't think that it's right or good or should be done. Additionally, reverse racism is a modern way to deflect legitimate criticism of the in power group as a way to deny people of color equity in the world, because many white people want to retain a position of power, and accepting that you have privilege is uncomfortable. As someone who, even though I'm a person of color, I still have a lot of privilege, it's not fun. I'm still more white passing than many people of color, which gives me privilege. I grew up lower middle class. I have an education. I'm cis and straight, and I'm obtaining a higher education. I'm here on YouTube devoting my time to talk about race and racism to probably no one, which means I have time, which means I have privilege. I'm sure there's a number of reasons I'm not thinking of off the top of my head as to why I'm privileged, but they are there. So, yeah, I know how uncomfortable and unfun it is to check your privilege. I think it's important that we recognize how difficult it can be to check one's own privilege. But again, you have privilege. Checking it doesn't make it disappear, and you're not suffering as much as someone who's disadvantaged by the same system that gives you privilege. Please do see Peter Coffin's video on the red pill for a more in-depth look on privilege, capitalism, and systemic injustice. Additionally, reverse racism is often just a semantic maneuver to avoid talking about the difference between a white person and a person of color being racist. The commenter on the video, Q Mandolin, pointed out, people can be racist against white people. It just means something different when white people encounter racism than when a black person does. It's a semantic argument that results in everybody missing the point. Racism by white people towards people of color throughout history and currently has been accepted in one way or another. There are different forms of racism, such as explicit racism, which is what I imagine most people think about when they think about racism. A black person getting beaten by a crowd of white people because they're black, or calling a black person the N-word or something along those lines. Post-Civil Rights Act, most of these things have been considered, not good. And thus a new kind of racism was born, aversive racism. Aversive racism is a form of racism that is built on the idea that there is a new social norm that being racist and doing racist things makes you a bad person, which, yeah. But aversive racism manifests not when it's explicit and expected to not be racist, but when it's not explicit to not be racist, and it most prominently manifests in ambiguous situations. A 2000 study by Dovido and Gardner showed how this operates. They gave white students a candidate and asked if they would recommend a person for the job. The candidate was either white or black, strong, ambiguous, or clearly unqualified. The strong and the weak candidates were recommended strongly and weakly respectively, regardless of race. but the ambiguous group showed something different. This is what modern racism looks like. White people giving other white people the benefit of the doubt and not giving it to people of color, especially black people. It perpetuates a system of inequality that impoverishes black people, leads to higher incarceration, more policing, more violent policing, and perpetuates a narrative in the media that feeds these biases via confirmation bias. Also, there are some academic definitions of racism that operate on a power dynamic, which is probably where she's getting her definition from. So she's not completely redefining it, she's just pulling from a different source, such as critical race theory. In David Foster Wallace's 1999 essay, Authority in American Usage, or Politics in the English Language is Redundant, he says, "Did you know that probing the seamy underbelly of the U.S. lexicography reveals ideological strife and controversy and intrigue and nastiness and fervor on a near-Lewinsky scale? For instance, did you know that some modern dictionaries are notoriously liberal and others notoriously conservative, and that certain conservative dictionaries were actually conceived and designed as corrective responses to the corruption and permissiveness of certain liberal dictionaries? That the oligarchic device of having a special distinguished usage panel of outstanding professional speakers and writers is some dictionaries' attempt at compromise between the voices of egalitarianism and traditionalism in English, but that the most linguistic liberals dismiss the usage panel device as a mere sham populism, as in calling upon the opinions of the elite it claims to be democratic guide. Did you know that the U.S. lexicography even had a seamy underbelly?" I didn't. Thanks, David Foster Wallace. Also, personal violent racism occurs a lot more frequently when dominant groups are racist towards minority groups. See, the thousands of black people that were lynched in the American South, the thousands of women that were burned at the stake for being witches. See Philosophy Tube's video on witchcraft, gender, and Marxism for a more in-depth look.
Cultural appropriation is real. 3, 2, 1.
Yeah, I think cultural appropriation is very real. You see all the time, like Coachella, we're in LA, and you see people in the Native American headdresses without knowing how important that is to Native people.
Why do they need to know that? Well, who cares? Who is that affecting negatively? You're gatekeeping a culture that you're not a part of. You know who doesn't care? Native Americans. So basically what you're telling me is if I go to Coachella and I put on a Native American headdress, people are going to stop me and go, wait a minute, hold on. You need to tell me about the Navajo. Hey, it's Halloween and I think geishas are pretty, so I want to be a geisha. Who cares? What Japanese person would be offended by that? If anything, you should be proud that your culture is so beautiful to someone else that they want to dress up as it.
All right, next point, cultural appropriation. Everyone's favorite thing to go crazy about for some reason. I think a lot of the discourse surrounding cultural appropriation has been pretty ridiculous, honestly. I think that, firstly, people need to recognize that cultural appropriation is bad. Secondly, people need to be a little bit more understanding of those who might be ignorant of what cultural appropriation means to someone else. Some people don't recognize that cultural appropriation is dangerous and harmful at times. I'm gonna pull from ContraPoints' really great video on cultural appropriation quickly. I think the start of that video is really good and is a good starting point for this argument.
Halloween costumes are often presented as one of the main examples of cultural appropriation, specifically whites who think it's okay to go to parties dressed as a Chinaman, an Indian, señoritas picantes, a Jew, or a black. But to me, this isn't even cultural appropriation. It's caricature and racial stereotyping. For someone to appropriate a culture, they at least need to have some kind of basic understanding or appreciation of that culture. Gringo motherfuckers dressing up as hombres con burros aren't appropriating Mexican culture, they're making a mockery of it. We should be able to agree that shit is racist before even having the conversation about cultural appropriation. And the same goes for Native American mascots and sports teams. It's not appropriation, it's the reduction of an already mostly exterminated culture to a racist cartoon caricature. I mean, the Washington Redskins, the name of the team is a racial slur. It has nothing to do with appropriation, it's just good old-fashioned racism. And if you're thinking, but why aren't you upset about Sports teams that stereotype white people. SJW hypocrisy exposed. I respond that when Native Americans repopulate North America, wipe out most of the white people, impose their own social, political, and religious institutions, and confine the remaining whites to ghettos, and then call their sports team the Chattanooga Honkies, well, then I'll join your White Lives Matter protest rally.
So, in addition to what she says in the rest of that video, which I highly recommend that you watch, I'll point to the fact that white people have repeatedly and consistently subjugated, exploited, and attempt to either assimilate or destroy other cultures for their own benefit. A white woman wearing a Native American headdress at a Burning Man show is a problem because it not only removes it from its original cultural and historical significance, it was almost definitely manufactured without the consent of American Indians and is being profited from. Also, to be clear, American Indians do care about these kind of issues. They actually care a lot because their culture has almost been eradicated by a long history of genocide and racialization. My Native friends have expressed a lot of frustration with cultural appropriation, racialization, systemic oppression, and assimilation that has all but completely erased their culture. I really don't know where you got that opinion from, besides nowhere, because yeah, Native American people have almost been completely destroyed. And it's time we recognize that and stop trying to steal everything from them. You actually make like a halfway decent point with the kimono example and then completely throw it in the garbage while making it. So the kimono is actually borrowing from Chinese fashion and isn't an integral part of the culture's religious and ritual heritage. Additionally, Japanese culture hasn't been almost completely eradicated by a more dominant culture. I don't think it's necessarily problematic all the time to borrow from another culture, as long as it's done respectfully and with consent from the proper cultural authorities, if they exist, especially if it's something that's going to be manufactured. You say,
Geishas are pretty, so I want to be a geisha. Who cares? What Japanese person would be offended by that? If anything, you should be proud that your culture is so beautiful to someone else that they want to dress up as it.
This is actually how a lot of white Americans who are upset about being called out on cultural appropriation frame this argument, so you're not alone. What this says to me is that you only deem a culture valid after you have benefited from it or exploited it. Why does mine or any other culture have to prove its worth to you?
Able to say the N-word while singing along to a song. 3, 2, 1.
The only reason I'm at somewhat disagree is because a lot of my favorite rappers use it frequently. Even when I'm in the car by myself, like I still feel like it's not my place. Maybe I'll like whisper it like with the
Oh my god. Dude, if I bought the Kendrick Lamar album and I love his music, I'm gonna sing along to it. Oh, hold on. Does this bitch have a fucking Charles Manson are you kidding me? This bitch has a Charles Manson pin on her jacket. Oh, you know, Charles Manson, the cult leader who murdered 9 people, I think it was. This stupid woman is gonna tell me I can't wear a kimono because that appropriates culture and is disrespectful. And she's literally wearing a pin of a cult murderer. Really? God damn, dude.
If they didn't put it in their songs, you wouldn't say it, right?
No, yeah, 100%.
So are they causing people to say that word more often? Because
yes.
you wouldn't say it if
It's
it
not
wasn't
white people's place to tell them what they can and cannot use.
You make a very good point against yourself.
So this one shouldn't be too long. The N-word is a reclaimed slur. Reclamation is actually a process of appropriation, so that's one of those good examples of cultural appropriation. However, if you need to say it, there should be a reason, not just singing along to a song, like, you know, quoting a text or person in an academic context. Keywords being academic context. There's no real reason to use this word when singing along to a song. You can't buy an N-word pass by buying a song from Kendrick Lamar. That's not how it works. It's still something that was used to berate and insult black people, and again, it's a slur. It was reclaimed to bring back power to the black community. A lot of black people don't like white people using the word, and they think that it's damaging. And again, they are the systemically and historically oppressed minority. It's about time that we respect their opinions and maybe even obey some of their demands when it comes to their treatment. Some black people also don't care if other people use the N-word, but a lot of them do, and a lot of them have a problem with it because it can be turned back into a slur very easily. Also, the whole thing about the girl with the Charles Manson pin is an ad hominem attack that I don't really think warrants addressing. Yeah, I would really, this person rather didn't wear the pin of somebody who supposedly tried to start a race war, but, you know, you can't win them all, I guess. Also, please do listen to last podcast on the left 3-part series on the Manson family, because it's absolutely hilarious and kind of shows that Manson was more of a bumbling idiot than the criminal, violent mastermind that people paint him as. So the opinions you expressed here are pretty dangerous because they're the same opinions that people have been using to oppress people of color for a long time. Again, let me be clear, I'm not calling you racist, I'm just saying what you're doing is conducive to racist and prejudiced action. The community you and people like you garner as a result of this kind of uninformed and reactionary opinion is dangerous. Peter Coffin and Non-Compete have some great videos on this kind of stuff, which I encourage you all to watch. I also encourage you all to continue to educate yourself before you go off spouting more uninformed and reactionary opinions that are potentially dangerous to people of color. I'll leave a link to a playlist called Change Your Mind that covers a bunch of YouTubers covering a bunch of different important topics to me and other people of color, so please do go watch those and try and inform yourself. Also, all my sources will be in the description. Thanks for watching, everybody. This is my first video ever, so let me know if you want more of this. I hope that I got your attention, Wubby, and I hope that I can help change your mind and that you can learn from this, because that's the most important thing, that we all learn from this, and that we learn to treat each other better and treat these particularly ill issues with more nuance.